Hello, NFL fans. Today we will be doing a tier list of the greatest running backs of all time. Now, mind you, there's probably some missing in here. The list that I found was of all guys that have already in the MVP. There are a couple that I don't know. Couldn't figure it out based on their picture. And we'll go through the tiers, but let me know what you think down in the comments below, and let's get to it. Starting off with all-time greats, obviously, best of the best. Hall of Fame caliber. These are guys that are just below that. They're still, of course, all Hall of Famers, just not as good as the top tier. And then you have guys that were great in their time, guys that I just don't know a lot about or just were really far in the distant past. The Hall, very good. These players are, I think, there might be only one or two players that I think don't actually deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, but are. But we'll get to that. And then the don't know category are guys that just, like I said, couldn't find the picture that they showed. But let me know in the comments down below what those players are that I may have missed that may go in this category. But let's start off with Barry Sanders. Of course, he's an all-time great. Over 1,500 rushing yards, 6-time first AP All-Pro, one-time MVP, 4-time rushing leader. And he's just one of the best. 99 rushing yards or 99 rushing touchdowns. He was a great running back. Sadly, his teams can never quite perform when they needed to most. Only had one playoff run during his whole time. He made the Pro Bowl every year, and he was clearly one of the most dominant backs of all time. It's just the championship just never came because the Lions were a terribly run organization at the time. They're getting better now. They're slowly improving, but still, they just weren't a good franchise, and I can't blame him for wanting to leave the Lions and retire and save his body. If your team's not going to improve and actually get better to where they need to be, then why the hell would you stay around? Next, we have Jerome Bettis. Probably controversial, but let me say, he's a 6-time Pro Bowler, 2-team AP First All Pro, over 1,300 rushing yards, and 91 rushing touchdowns. I think he's kind of a compiler. When I saw Jerome Bettis, he looked dominant at times, but he just seemed like he was just a good, consistent running back. He was never the greatest, in my opinion. Yes, he won a Super Bowl, although let's be honest, that Super Bowl 40 against the Seahawks was kind of rigged against the Seahawks, and the Seahawks totally got screwed a couple times in that game, and really, the Seahawks should have won that Super Bowl, but it's neither here nor there. He's a good running back. Probably deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. I just think wasn't one of the most dominant running backs of all time. Had the stats it says he was, it's just my opinion. Don't hate me because I don't care if you do. Next we have Curtis Martin. He is definitely in the Hall of Fame category. Not one of the all-time greats, but he had 2 distinct careers, one with the Patriots, one with the Jets. He was a 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time first-team All-Pro, over 1,400 rushing yards, 90 rushing touchdowns, and 10 receiving touchdowns as well. Was pretty dominant during his time with the Patriots, and more so with the Jets. He famously, and during his best season, like 2003 2004, played through most of the year with the torn meniscus on. Way to lead in the league in rushing. Great player. Never had the success that you would think was away from the Patriots right before they started winning championships. So sadly, he never got to taste that sweet championship glory, but dominant nonetheless and totally deserving to be in this tier. Just not an all-time great. Next, we have Earl Campbell. Hall of Fame for sure. Not as doesn't have the durability as some of the other running backs on the list, but he was a 1-time MVP, 3-time rushing leader, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time first team All Pro, and over 4,000 rushing yards, or over 9,000 rushing yards, I should say, and 74 rushing touchdowns. Great running back in his day. He had a 3 or 4 year stretch where he's just absolutely the best running back in the league at the end of the 70s, early 80s. but his injuries caught up with him. Never had the real long term that a lot of other running backs on the list have, but he was so dominant when he was there, and he was just a prototypical power back during his time, and one of the real first power backs that I can really think of when thinking about football. Obviously, before my time, so I never got to see him play, but from the footage that I've seen, he just bowled through guys like a bull in a china shop, and he certainly deserves to be in this spot. Emmitt Smith, definitely in the Hall of Fame category. All-time rushing touchdowns leader, all-time rushing yards leader in the NFL. 8-time Pro Bowler, 4-time first team All-Pro, over 18,000 rushing yards, 4-time rushing leader, and he was a great running back. Still one of the best of all time, but not necessarily a all-time great, because when you look at its offensive lines, like, you put a lot of the running backs on this list in there, and they're going to be great. I mean, that was an all-time great offensive line for their 3 Super Bowls. Thanks, Vikings, for helping make that possible again. But he's still a legitimately great running back. Not one of the all-time greats, even though his stats say he should be the greatest running back of all time. Just not as dominant as some of the others that will come along in this list. I mean, if you were to give me an option, Barry Sanders or Emmitt Smith, I'm taking Barry Sanders. Because if you put Barry Sanders behind that offensive line, he's definitely winning championships for sure. Next, Eric Dickerson. All-time great. Most rushing yards in a season in the history of the NFL. 6-time Pro Bowler, 5-time first team All-Pro, 4-time rushing leader, over 2,000s in the one season, nearly broken by Adrian Peterson, famously came up to like 7 yards short, over 13,000 rushing yards and 90 rushing touchdowns. Just great. Famously good college athlete as well. Went to the Rams, had a decent career in Indianapolis as well. He even played for the Packers for a while. For 1 year at the end of his career, didn't really do anything, but when he was there, he was absolutely dominant. Trademark look of the glasses. He's just a great running back. Could bowl through anybody. He's just one of the most great-looking specimens we've ever seen in the history of football. And not much else to say other than that. Gale Sayers. I'm going to put him in the Hall of Fame. He's not one of the all-time greats. He just didn't have the longevity they would expect for somebody to be an all-time great. But he was a 4-time Pro Bowler, 5-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time rushing leader, over 4,000 or almost 5,000 rushing yards, and 39 rushing touchdowns. So when you look at yes, it was during the 60s, but even then, you feel like he should have had a longer career. Sadly, didn't. Injuries caught up with him, and he's still definitely Hall of Famer because when he was playing, he was one of the most dominant backs of his era. I just don't think he's as good as an Eric Dickerson or a Barry Sanders. Yes, maybe just because it's a time difference kind of thing, but I wouldn't even put him better than Earl Campbell. I think Earl Campbell will look more dominant than Gale Sayers, to be honest. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Jim Brown. We'll put him here. Jim Brown, I think you could put him in any era of the NFL, and he would do just as great. And let's just look at those stats. 3-time MVP, 1-time NFL champion, 9-time Pro Bowler, 8-time first-team All-Pro, or 5-time rushing leader, over 12,000 rushing yards, 106 rushing touchdowns, and added 20 receiving touchdowns as well. Just prototypical running back of the late 50s, early 60s. He was the best running back of that time and went on to be a great movie star as well. Yes, he probably cut his career short a little bit to go into acting, so he could have had even more numbers. But from what we saw, absolute domination all throughout his career, never really had a bad season. And the Browns could only wish they could go back to that time. Because even though they didn't win, they had still far more success than they do today. Not discounting this past season, but they had a pretty good season. But all-time great running back, and definitely one of the most dominant ones of all time. Next, we have Jimmy Taylor, who I'm going to put in the all-time great because had he not been playing during the era of Jim Brown, he was the second best running back every year he was there. It was always Jim Taylor or Jim Brown winning the big MVP or winning the big awards, winning the rushing titles. And let's go over some Jim Taylor stats. 4-time NFL champion, 1-time Super Bowl champion, so 5-time champion. Again, part of the greatest dynasty the NFL's ever seen. Suck at Patriots fans, Chiefs fans, and any other dynasty in the NFL. Can't beat that. A 1-time MVP, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time AP First Team All Pro, a rushing leader, over or almost 9,000 rushing yards, 83 rushing touchdowns. He was the dominant one behind Jim Brown. Again, if Jim Brown is not in, say there's no Jim Brown in the NFL ever, Jim Taylor would be the number one back. He'd have all the accolades that Jim Brown had, but he also has the champions as well. So, I mean, when you look at the stats or championships, which player would you rather have, though, all those championships or all the stats that Jim Brown had? Most players would probably say they'd have the championships, but sadly, Jim Taylor is kind of just not talked about as much as he should because it's just because Jim Brown was just number one. But Jim Taylor did beat Brown a couple times in the big awards, but more times than not, Jim Brown was getting the awards over Jim Taylor. But Jim Taylor has the championships, and that can't be beat. Next, we have LT. We'll put LT above Dickerson, I think. One of my favorite players of all time. Probably one of my favorite running backs of all time as well. 1-time MVP, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time First Team All Pro, 2-time rushing leader, 28 rushing yards in the season. So a record over almost 14,000 rushing yards, over 145 rushing touchdowns. Had some passing touches as well. Was a great receiving back as well. Just one of the great dual threats you'll ever see a running back ever. Sadly, probably could have had more yards. He just had some injuries later in his career. He could never get over that championship belt because they always ran into the Patriots every time. And that's why the Chargers have still live in championship infamy, because every time they had a good team, the Patriots would just somehow magically win. Marlon McCree, again, ruined the Chargers' best chance to win a Super Bowl. And remember, in that game, in the Marlon McCree game, if you remember, Tom Brady had 3 interceptions. It was absolutely awful, but it was bailed out by Marlon McCree's interception, and then he gave it right back. It's just sad to see that Tomlinson never won a Super Bowl. Same thing with Phillip Rivers, never won a Super Bowl and should have as well. But thankfully, for Patriots fans, you could always hope that the Chargers would break down when you played them. And LT is still one of the most dominant running backs of all time. And it's sad to say he never won anything at all. Larry Csonka. I'm going to put him in the all-time great because he was a truly dominant back, especially when the Super Bowls came around. 2-time Super Bowl champion, 1-time Super Bowl MVP, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time First Team All-Pro, over 8,000 rushing yards, 64 rushing touchdowns. He was great in the Super Bowl against the Vikings, absolutely mauled them all throughout the game. He won another Super Bowl as well. Not much, still way before my time, so the most I can think of Larry Csonka is when he was really dominant in the Super Bowls. Still had a good regular season career, but when the time came to play in the biggest moments, he was there dominating and running guys over, and he did a damn good job doing it throughout the years of his career, and certainly is an all-time great. You can probably argue if he belongs in the Hall of Fame tier or the all-time great. I think he belongs in the all-time great because of how dominant he was. Marcus Allen. We'll put Marcus Allen above Jim Taylor. But Marcus Allen was a great running back in his time as well. One-time MVP, five-time Pro Bowler, three-time first-team All-Pro, two-time rushing leader, 20. No, what wrong? Never disregard that. MVP, six-time Pro Bowler, one-time first-team All-Pro, three-time rushing leader, over 12,000 rushing yards, and 144 rushing yards as well. Another great playoff performer. Had one of the best Super Bowl rushing performances of all time. In that game, he had almost 200 rushing yards, a couple touchdowns. He was great. He was great when it came to play, and he's just a real dominant player throughout his career, and he truly deserves to be in this part of the list. Next, we have OJ. OJJ. Orenthal James Simpson. And he was a great running back, famous woman respecter, of course. One-time MVP, five-time Pro Bowler, five-time first-team All-Pro, four-time rushing leader, 11,236 rushing yards, and 61 rushing touchdowns. During his era, during the early 70s, he was the face of the NFL. He was the best running back, the most dominant running back. There is nobody else like him. And even though he never won any championship, went on to have a big career as an entertainer. Of course, got away with murder, 2 counts of murder. And the one time he just tries to get his stuff back, then he's considered a criminal. But dominant in his day, obviously way before my time, but deserves to be in the all-time great tier, even though he's an all-time piece of shit as well. Terrell Davis definitely belongs. Yeah, we'll put him above Sanka, I think. Not like I said with other players on this list, the longevity is a big time issue for him. But he was so dominant during his 6 or 7 years in the NFL that he belongs in the Hall of Fame, and that's why he's in the Hall of Fame. One of only a few players with over 2,000 rushing yards in a season, 2-time Super Bowl champion, 1-time Super Bowl MVP, 3-time Pro Bowler, 3-time first-team All-Pro, 1-time rushing leader, over 7,000 rushing yards and 60 rushing touchdowns. He was a great dual threat as well. And when you think of championships, John Elway probably never wins a championship if it's not for Terrell Davis. I mean, who knows if John Elway keeps going if they lose to the Packers. Terrell Davis was the reason why the Broncos beat the Packers in the Super Bowl. It was not John Elway. Terrell Davis was the reason why the Packers lost the Super Bowl, and it makes me angry, but it's not John Elway that won that Super Bowl. It was Terrell Davis. Terrell Davis could not be stopped that whole game. Sadly, injuries caught up to him, but for his short term in the NFL, he was so dominant. He belongs to be up in the all-time greats just because of his 4 or 5 year dominant period that just he was like watching somebody walk on water, but he's great. Thurman Thomas, he belongs in the Hall of Fame category. Great rushing or running back in his own right. Now, 1-time MVP, 5-time Pro Bowler, 3-time first-team All-Pro, over 12,000 rushing yards and 88 rushing touchdowns. Never the most dominant running back. Never. I mean, he did have the one MVP season with the K-Gun. I mean, the K-Gun is just one of the coolest names for an NFL offense you'll ever see. Sadly, like all of his teammates didn't win a Super Bowl, never could get over the hump. Their best chance to win, the Giants, one of their Giants all-time great defenses stopped them and won a Super Bowl in their place. Of course, Scott Norwood lost that game as well, but we're not gonna bag on the kicker because the Bills lost that Super Bowl because of their play on the field. Yes, it sucks that it came down to a field goal and Norwood missed it, but Bills had many opportunities before then to win the game. They just didn't play very well. I mean, they were playing against a backup quarterback, and they still lost the Super Bowl. Great running back in his own right, just not one of the all-time greats in my book, but he was fun to watch if you were in the era. Tony Dorsett definitely belongs. Ooh, boy. Man. Can I put him in the all-time great tier above Emmitt Smith? No, I don't think so. Tony Dorsett, Hall of Fame career, not one of the all-time greats, but we'll go over his stats. Super Bowl champion, 4-time Pro Bowler, 1-time All-Pro. The longest rushing touchdown in the game in NFL history, 99 yards. It was a fantastic run, by the way. 12,739 rushing yards, 77 rushing touchdowns, added 13 receiving touchdowns as well. Great running back in his day. Never the most dominant, but he was one of the better running backs the Cowboys have ever had. I can't put him above Emmitt Smith because the stats just don't let me, but he was a great running back in his own right and was a piece of a championship as well. Great running back all the same. And here we have Walter Payton. Walter Payton, I got to put him up there. He was so dominant during his whole career. He's just one of the best running backs we've ever seen. And I'll tell you why. 1-time MVP, 9-time Pro Bowler, 7-time All-Pro, over 16,000 rushing yards, 110 rushing touchdowns, and 15 receiving touchdowns as well. Sweetness, as he was called, was great. Helped the Bears win a Super Bowl, even though, let's be honest, the defense was the main reason why the team won the Super Bowl. But he was an all-time great, famous woman respecter as well. But he's a fantastic running back. I wish I could have seen him. He was way before my time, and sadly, he has passed away. But he was a great running back nonetheless. Floyd Little. I don't know much about this guy, but apparently he was great in his time. He was called the franchise as a nickname, so that's pretty cool. One of the Broncos' first great running backs that they had. We had 5 Pro Bowls, 1 first-time All-Pro for 5,000 rushing yards, 43 rushing touchdowns, and he was a great running back for his day. I just don't know much more about him. Obviously, way before my time. But he was nicknamed the franchise, so that's a cool name anyway. The Broncos didn't win anything during this time. We're still a young franchise, but when he was there, he was one of the better running backs of his day. Not up to the level of OJ, but he's still a great running back nonetheless. I guess this was right before OJ. No, I guess he played towards the end of his career with OJ a little bit, but good running back. Just don't know much about him. Franco Harris, we can put him up here. 9-time Pro Bowler, 1-time first team All-Pro, 4-time Super Bowl champion, 1-time MVP, over 12,000 rushing yards, 91 rushing touchdowns, and of course, the Immaculate Reception. He was a great running back in his day. One of the big parts of why the Steelers were so successful with that offense. Still before my time though. He was great. I've been told he was great. I wish I could have seen him play during his heyday, but had a great career nonetheless. Leroy Kelly, he's great in his day apparently, and he had 6-time Pro Bowler, 3-time AP first team All-Pro, over 7,000 rushing yards, 74 touchdowns, and 1 championship. I believe he followed after Jim Brown, so the Browns had a penchant for having good running backs during their heyday. Sadly, never won anything with Leroy Kelly, but still a great running back nonetheless. Carried on the mantle after Jim Brown nicely, and was a good running back in his own right. He was not one of the all-time greats, though. And these 2 players, I don't know who they are. Let me know in the comments who they are. I tried to reverse search their pictures. I couldn't find anything, but those are the best running backs of all time as I see them. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Have a great day. God bless, and go Pack Go.